of the Flame. Today's guest, we have Georgie Jessup, which is really great. She's a great performing artist, and today we're going to talk about what Georgie has done. We're going to talk about her up-and-coming album and also some of her past albums. So, hi, Georgie.
Hi, how are you?
It's great for you to be here today. So, is there anything that you would like to talk about, in particularly in reference to your new album?
Well, I have a new album coming out, hopefully sometime this month. We're finishing up the production, and it's getting ready to be duplicated. It's called Philosopher Dogs, and it's 11 songs, and it's kind of Americana music. So there's influences from country to soul to rock and roll.
Absolutely. So I actually had the pleasure of hearing a few selections from the album. So could you tell us which one's your favorite? All of them, right?
Well, every album has a different place in my heart for it. American Holocaust, I recorded back in 1994, and it was 10 songs that dealt with the Holocaust that took place in America, or as the native people say, Turtle Island.
Wow.
And I just felt it was a story that needed to be told, not only for Native Americans, but for Anglo-Americans to understand, the true history of this country and what was done, so that we can avoid those kind of mistakes in the future, because in my way of thinking, we haven't avoided those mistakes too often. We find ourselves repeating the same kind of things over and over and over again. Maybe not with the genocide and the Holocaust that took place against Native Americans, but certainly you can apply what happened to the Native Americans to what happens to suburbia as big corporations come in and just make it all pavement and roads and just overpopulate an area, which causes all kinds of issues, all kinds of infrastructural issues and everything else. So eventually the people who were there in the first place in a rural setting are displaced they're forced out. They can't afford the taxes, or they can't maneuver in that kind of new cultural situation where there's people on top of people, and that's never a healthy issue. So I wanted to do the album to kind of wake, not only, you don't have to wake Native Americans up, they know, but I wanted to wake, the white people in this country up to what actually happened and the kinds of misinformation that the history books give. So,
as you know, Keepers of the Flame is about telling stories, and your way of telling stories as a recording artist is through singing and music. Mm-hmm. And we would like to get more in depth about the Native American history and story behind that, and how you express that through your music. So could you tell us more about Wounded Knee?
Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee.
Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee.
Yes.
I'm totally sorry. Just run that up.
That was a song that I wrote actually after American Holocaust, and it's more of a reflective piece. And at the time, I was fighting Arundel Mills Mall from taking over our community. And so I realized early on that their pockets were too deep, that they were going to win in the end. But I wanted to make a stand and say what needed to be said, so that, maybe people would get on board and do something about it. Never happened. But so the song is about kind of passing the flame on to the next generation, saying, I fought my fight, you guys got to pick up where I left off, and just, leave my bones up on the mountain, send my spirit out to sea.
Wow.
Bury my heart at Wounded Knee.
Well, we're so excited. When we come back from the break, will you be able to perform that song for
Absolutely.
us today? Great.
Absolutely.
So we'll see you after the break.
I walk away many times. I have seen deserving storm. another piece of heaven, just to build a shopping mall. Leave my bones up on the mountain, send my spirit out to sea. Let my people on my journey bury my heart in me. Bury my heart in me. I have seen great mountains crumble from the shovels filled with gold. Big rivers stagnant waters as we celebrate our soul. Leave my bones up on the mountain, send my spirit out to sea. Let my people on my journey bury my heart in me. Bury my heart in me. Let us always fight a good fight, even when our heroes fall. Teach the children they are warriors, let them stand for justice cause. And leave my bones up on the mountain, send my spirit out to sea. Let my people know my journey, bury my heart in me. Bury my heart in me. Come on. Bury my heart in me. Bury my heart in me.
Wow, that was totally great. I mean, it was just so heart-tugging. So, let's talk a little bit more about your Native American background.
Okay.
I read some of your stories through the articles that you sent me online, and it was just like a lot of things that like really I could relate to, because being as though my family is also Native American but of Cherokee. I was just touched by some of the stories, especially the one that you told about your grandmother.
Okay. Yeah. Native American, as far as I know, I don't have any Native American blood myself. I always felt an affinity to Native American things from the time I was a little child, from some of my first conscious memories on up through my life, and it's always been a thread in my life. The issues that I dealt with, gender issues, were always with me from a very early age. So those were two threads, and music was the third thread, that I was always interested in performing my music. And I even started writing songs when I was in 4th or 5th grade, and kind of silly songs, but I did try my hand at it, and I was taking various instruments and learning. My grandmother, the woman in the man suit, which is this album, she was a big influence on me, and we spent a lot of time with her as both my parents were working together in the family business. And so during Christmas period, my mother would work with my father when there was a lot of business and he needed the help. And so my grandmother was always with us, and she wanted me to read, and to encourage me to read, she gave me a book on Crazy Horse, a children's book on the Lakota warrior Crazy Horse. And read it and piqued my interest more. I liked the cover of the book, real simplistic, childish kind of attractions to the whole thing, but I liked the story. And she also always had these old postcards of Native Americans, and I never did, before she passed away, I never thought to ask her why she had them. But I always hung on to them. I still have them in my home to this day. And it just, my interest kept growing and growing in Native things. When I watched the Westerns on a Saturday afternoon, I was always rooting for the Indians. I didn't care that whoever made the film saw them as the bad guys. I was always with the Indians. In my playtime, I was always a half-breed. I always had Indian blood in me, even though, I was dealing with the white man's world. And then as I got older and I got into high school, I read a book about called Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee by Dee Brown, and it just opened my eyes. And actually, it was the first real, adult book that I read, and I was just struck at how they had missionaries describing how the native people lived. They had generals and lieutenants and stuff talking about their experiences. They had missionaries talking about their experience with Native Americans. And some of the things that really interest me was the white people were amazed that they could spend so much time playing and gaming and doing craft work and spending time with their families and their children and laughing, and just when the food was plentiful, just gorging themselves with this food
And
for
that
days
was,
on end.
Totally interesting. Like when I read there in your paper, the insert that you quoted, when it said that Indians, they, sleep when they're tired, they eat when they're hungry.
Right.
And, is...
And that was the other thing that, they said, yet when an enemy approached, they could pack up and they could roll for days until they got into safety. And that was kind of the way I always approached
and
life.
then also the quote, if you can share with the people of I think it had to do with any day being a beautiful day.
A good day to die.
Yes.
Hokahay, right.
Hokahay.
That's a song on American Holocaust. It's called Hokahay. And yeah, it's kind of a war cry that the Lakota used, and it was calling the warriors and saying that make yourself right. You've made your life right with Creator, with the world, with your family, with your loved ones. And so if today is the day that you die, this is a good day to die,
Because your house is in order.
Right, because your house is in order, exactly. So, I progressed from that to where a lot in that time period, a lot of the American Indian movement, which was considered militant by our government, and it was kind of the women's movement was starting, Native American movement was starting, African American, Black Panthers and, all that was going on, Martin Luther King, the whole 9 yards. And so it was a pretty exciting time to come into maturity. And I was reading a lot about everything. I was reading about the kinds of things that the FBI did to these groups to subvert them. Some people might know it as the Church report or study. It was Senator Church did a study, and they showed how the FBI did illegal wiretapping. They put plants. They did it to Martin Luther King. They, did it to Malcolm X. They tried to turn Malcolm X and Martin Luther King against each other.
Right.
They did that in the Native American community too. So I was really interested in that, and I was like, I almost went to the 1973 Wounded Knee takeover, which was about a civil war that was actually going on the Pine Ridge Reservation in those days. And there were more drive-by shootings on Pine Ridge than New York and LA combined during that time period. And people don't know that, but our government decided that they were going to back the tribal council, which was made up of mixed blood people who could care less about their traditional. So you had Pine Ridge was the center, was where all the tribal council was, and then on the outskirts you had the traditional people that were trying to follow the old ways and the old ways of governing and everything involved. And so there was a conflict between them, and the tribal council was welcoming uranium mining, dumping of radioactive waste. The water was getting polluted, and the elders were standing up. So any elder or family connected to the elders, could have a drive-by shooting with people that were called the goon squads. The goon squads were given information from the FBI and our government in order to do their dirty work. So all this was going on, and I got really heavy into that, and that's part of what inspired me to write American Holocaust. But the other part of it was that I was dealing with my own transgender issues, and it was a really hard wrestle to me. I didn't really grow up in what's stereotypically considered an effeminate male, but yet this was a spirit that was in me that I could not deny and I could not turn my back on. The last place that I thought I would find acceptance was in the Native American community. So I actually had gotten married, and then in 1983, I had read a book called Lame Deer, Seeker of Visions, and it was written by a medicine man named John Fire Lame Deer. And I was very inspired by that book, and it was the first place that I saw the word Winte, which is a Lakota tradition that I would fit into. It really gets acquiesced by a lot of different groups within the GBLT community, but it really is a specific tradition. And you'll hear people from the gay community or even the transgender community saying, oh yeah, we were medicine people. Well, sometimes we were, but it wasn't us as individuals that were the sacred, we weren't sacred just because we were born this way. We were sacred because we had the potential to follow this sacred tradition.
And y'all had that purpose, because I read in one of your papers that the Wente, they usually were fell in between, if a husband and a wife was to be married, they usually were filler people, they would help tend to the children.
Absolutely.
They were even, it was like a blessing to be named by a Wente.
Yes.
So a lot.
A father would, Wente would only, traditionally they would only take on 4 children in a year to give them a spirit name.
Wow.
It's said that Sitting Bull had a Wente name, that Crazy Horse had a Wente name, a couple other leaders like Gall, and probably half a dozen others that if there was a written history, you would find that they had Wente names, because it was said to give their child protection in battle. If a Wente braided the hair of a warrior, that was a special medicine that was going to help them in battle. But the latitude in our white culture is all material. So, how much can I make? How much can I gain?
Agreed.
Look at all the stuff I have. In Native American culture, the latitude was in spiritual. So if a dream told you, came to you, and the Thunderbirds came to you, you were a thunder dreamer. So that made you a Heyoka, a sacred clown. If you were somebody like me, who had this dual spirit thing going on, that you couldn't shake, that was the Wente. And warriors had their own medicine that they had from dreams. So a name, you could be named, Little Stone when you were a child, but your name could change 20 times before you die.
Wow.
And it reflected something about your life, some deed you did, or some spiritual.
That was so interesting, because I was actually nicknamed Quiet Storm when I was a kid.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That's really cool, because one of my grandmother's names was Quiet Storm. Not my blood mother. She was part of the Assateague people on the Eastern Shore, and she was very important to me. Her name was Quiet Storm.
Awesome. Tell me a little bit about, one of my favorite songs that I actually kind of grew attached to was On the Road to Trinidad.
Oh, okay.
Could you tell us a little bit about that song?
Trinidad was a song, as I was dealing with my gender issues. This book that I talked about earlier, Lame Deer, kind of inspired me to go to the reservation. And I was married at the time, and my then wife and I traveled to Pine Ridge, and we just had some names of people that we looked up. And the short story is that it led me to Grandpa Frank Foolscrow, and he was one of the most respected medicine people on Pine Ridge. He passed away in 1989, and at 99 years old, where the average lifespan was 45.
Wow, and I read that from your article that was quite a journey just to even get to be introduced to him.
It was pretty amazing, and you know, he really changed my life, and he told me he was going to pray with me with the pipe, and my life just started coming together. It was hard. There was a lot of hard things that I had to learn, and one of it was maturing as a trans woman. Shortly after I came back from Pine Ridge, I started to record the album and write the songs for American Holocaust. And I was kind of still in between male and female at that time. And although as a traditional Winte, we're always between male and female. And but in terms of the Wasichu world, I hadn't transitioned.
And Wasichu means white man's world.
It actually literally means fat takers, because they always took the best of whatever the native people had for themselves, so they called them Wasichu. And you know, I was dealing with that, and I tried to you know, question myself, because I wanted to make sure in our culture, things are so confusing on a spiritual level for everybody. You wrestle with those kinds of things internally all the time, and there's people pulling at you in all kinds of different directions of what is right and what is wrong, and ultimately you have to figure it out for yourself. And I was doing a lot of soul searching, so I knew as a male, I played cowboys and Indians, I wrestled, I loved playing football, and I, you know, was a defensive end, and I, you know, I was good at it, and I loved it, and I didn't have my father saying, go out and be a man and play football. I just liked doing it.
And I know you used to say that your grandmother used to try to pull you away from that stuff because you were more into like hanging out with the...
I was hanging with the bad boys. And, you know, so all this was going on at the same time, but I truly enjoyed the male side of me, and there's a lot of transgender people, if you listen to their stories, they really hated being, you know, they hated themselves as males, and they weren't happy, but I never hated my male side. I was a good person then, and I think I'm a good person now.
Absolutely.
And so Road to Trinidad was written while I was wrestling with, well, what does it mean to be a woman? Like, really, what is the definition? Because I would watch things like Phil Donahue show and Oprah Winfrey, and there'd be all these transgender people on there, and they'd be like, well, when I was little, I played with dolls, and, you know, I helped my mom make curtains, and all these things that are stereotypically female.
Yeah, all about glamour.
But that's not what women really are. I mean, there's a wide variety of women, biological women, and where they stand on masculine and femininity.
And it's like you couldn't have said it better yourself when you said that I'm not trying to be, I just am.
Yes, and that's exactly it. So I kind of, you know, I looked at women that I thought were good role models for me. Mother Jones was one. You know, Frida Kahlo, the great painter, and just, you know, very progressive mind and politically, you know, aware of what was going on in the world, and, you know, fighting for freedom. You know, and I conjure up the image of Thelma and Louise, you know, the fictional figures, and so I just thought about all these really strong, you know, independent women, and so that was my road to Trinidad, was coming to grips with, well, you know, I just am, and, you know, I'm just going to be the woman that I am, and, you know, or the Winte that I am, whatever. And at that point, it was like a heavy burden coming off of me, because I no longer really cared what anybody thought of me. It doesn't matter to me. You know, if you like me, that's really great, and if you don't, sorry. I'm not trying to offend you, but
you delivered that really great message, and it's like, and I definitely love the flow of it, because it kind of had like kind of a Aerosmith feel to it, and like, you know, soft rock, and then it was like that message. Like I'm a rock and roll fan, so it's just like it kind of remind me of like the message that you'll get through like when you listen to System of a Down or something like that. Is
Yeah,
very
System of a
inspiring.
Down. Yeah,
I love it.
yeah. My nephews are fans of them. But you know, and yeah, the road to Trinidad. Trinidad was referring to Trinidad, Colorado, which is where I went to have my surgery, and with Dr. Stanley Biber, who was like the grandfather of all transsexual surgery and stuff. And so I just used that as a metaphor, and like I just saw my life as a road song, as a journey. I follow a lot of Power of Myth, Joseph Campbell, and you know he's constantly talking about the hero's journey, where you just kind of jump into the abyss. And me, you know, I was a respected songwriter. I was a respected performer in the music community in D.C., Baltimore, and the surrounding states and everything. And so it was a real hard decision. I was stone cold in love with my wife, and she was one of the best people I've ever known in this life. So it wasn't just, you know, you hear a lot from the right wing kind of pseudo-Christian side of things, and they think that people like me, that this is a choice. And I, you know, if I had a choice, I would have stayed in that role. If I could have done that and stayed sane, I would have. But I couldn't, and nobody prayed more and talked to Creator more about this than me. And whereas a lot of transgender people will go from, deciding that they're transsexuals, a year later they had the surgery. I waited 10 years before I ever had the surgery, because I wanted to make sure I had questioned myself and looked into my own heart, you know, and really, really thought it through. I've done the surgery. I'm legally, my license says female, and all my records say female, and I did it, you know, so I don't care what you think I am. It doesn't matter to me. I am who I am.
So exciting. So when we come back, everyone, we're going to have one more great performance by Georgie Jessup. So don't go anywhere.